Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the show. You're watching your top human rights organization review, and I am your host, Bryce Dolan. Now today on the show, we're going to cover 5 of your top human rights organizations and look at the top stories from each one of their websites. To begin the show, we go with Human Rights Watch in Burma, as aid has been blocked to Rakhine State. Next, Amnesty International urges the UN to act on attacks of eastern Aleppo. Staying with the UN Watch Director calls for removal of the Syrian regime's Goddess of Justice statue from outside the UN Human Rights Council chamber. Then, the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, helps and trains individuals to care for the dead during a crisis. Then we'll end the show with Protection International, as activists are summoned in Thailand after posting about military visits to their homes. Now, the Burmese government and army should urgently ensure humanitarian aid can reach ethnic Rohingya and other vulnerable populations in northern Rakhine State, Human Rights Watch said. Government security operations have cut off assistance to tens of thousands of people and forced many to flee their homes. The United Nations and donor governments should publicly call on the Burmese government to ensure aid organizations can reach those in need. Recent violence in northern Rakhine State has led the army to deny access to aid agencies that provide essential health care and food to people at grave risk, said Brad Adams, Human Rights Watch Asia Director. The Rohingya and others have been especially vulnerable since the ethnic cleansing campaign in 2012, and many rely on humanitarian aid to survive. On October 9, 2016, armed men attacked 3 police outposts in Mongda Township near the Bangladesh border, killing 9 police officers and seizing a number of weapons. Now, the president's office blamed a previously unknown Rohingya group for the attacks, though other officials have said it is unclear who was responsible. Government security forces declared the area an operation zone and began sweeps to find the attackers. According to senior members of the government, security forces have killed 30 people, while 5 members of the security forces have also been killed. However, reporting is heavily reliant on government sources, as journalists have been denied access. Now, Rohingya activists have alleged that government forces have committed serious abuses during the current operations, including summary executions and the burning of villages. Now, since October 9th, authorities have blocked all aid deliveries to Mongda Township, and aid agencies have not been able to conduct a needs assessment. We have asked for access from township level to union level, a World Food Program Partnerships officer said. The official explanation for being denied access is that security operations are ongoing. Now, under international law, authorities may restrict freedom of movement for specific security reasons for a limited period of time, but broad and open-ended restrictions are not permissible. Now, under the UN Guiding Principles on Internal Displacement, all authorities shall grant and facilitate the free passage of humanitarian assistance and grant persons engaged in the provisions of such assistance rapid and unimpeded access to the internally displaced. So again, we see the Burmese government oppressing their minority population of the Rohingya, but also at the same time breaking an international law and violating a number of human rights. So it's time for the UN to do something about the Burmese government. Now, moving on, the UN General Assembly, the UNGA, must step in to fill the void left by the Security Council members' catastrophic failure to end relentless attacks targeting the civilian population in eastern Aleppo city, said Amnesty International ahead of a UNGA meeting later today. Now, the organization has released new satellite imagery illustrating the scale of destruction, as well as testimony from civilians trapped in the city, providing evidence that Syrian government forces with Russian support have callously attacked residential homes, medical facilities, schools, markets, and mosques as part of a deliberate military strategy to empty the city of its inhabitants and seize control. Now, in some cases, there is evidence that Russian-made cluster munitions were used in the attacks. The world's inactions in the face of the continuing carnage and blatant violations in Aleppo City must end. The UN General Assembly must show it can act where the Security Council has so catastrophically failed. The credibility of the UN is at stake, said Lynn Malouf, Deputy Director for Research at Amnesty International's Beirut Regional Office. Now, the scale of the bloodshed and destruction wrought on eastern Aleppo city over the past month is harrowing. Syrian government forces, with the support of Russia, have launched relentless attacks that have flagrantly disregarded fundamental rules of international humanitarian law. Now, here is some of the drone footage of the destroyed city. The woefully inadequate 8-hour pause in bombing announced by Russia is no substitute for unimpeded access for impartial humanitarian relief and an end to unlawful attacks. Member states must use today's meeting to demand a lifting of the siege, an end to unlawful attacks, and to push for concrete measures to bring those responsible for war crimes to justice. Now, we're not letting Syria and Russia off that easy. We're going to stay with them on our next topic. Staying with the United Nations. UN Watch Director Hillel Neuer calls on the UN to remove the Syrian regime's Goddess of Justice statue that is on permanent display outside the UN Human Rights Council chambers. Astonishingly, 4 years have passed since the UN's top human rights body held an urgent session on the carnage in Syria, despite hundreds of thousands killed and wounded. So today's global spotlight on Aleppo and other Syrian victims is welcome, if long overdue, said Hillel Neuer, Executive Director of UN Watch. Now, yesterday, U.S. Ambassador Samantha Power rightly told the General Assembly that accountability starts by speaking the truth about who is responsible for the unspeakable horrors we are witnessing, that the perpetrators have names, and that when we don't call out Russia, we obscure responsibility in a way that each of us would find totally intolerable if we found our families or our neighborhoods pummeled like those in eastern Aleppo. Yet regrettably, today's Western-backed resolution squanders a golden opportunity to hold key perpetrators to account. The draft strongly condemns ISIS, yet refuses to condemn or even mention Russia, Iran, or Hezbollah, the major forces behind Bashar al-Assad's regime, the main source of death and destruction in Syria since 2011. Instead, the text only makes demands on the Syrian authorities and its supporters. It's sad that Putin's warplanes can bomb a UN-backed humanitarian convoy and help pulverize the people of Aleppo, and yet enjoy complete immunity at the UN Human Rights Council. Worse yet, Russia sits there as a member and is certain to be re-elected in the UN vote next Friday at the General Assembly in New York. If the world won't stand up to Russian aggression now, in a forum where Moscow holds no veto, when will they? It is outrageous that right outside the council chamber, the UN has on permanent display a statue, a Goddess of Justice statue, donated by the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Now, this is the height of cynicism. When we take the floor today, we will call on the UN to remove it immediately, said Neuer. In the words of former Syrian political prisoner Mohammed Kamal al-Abwani, is this not an insult to the 300,000 Syrians who have been murdered during this conflict? Is this not a standing insult to the millions who suffer daily? He's absolutely right. It is a horrible insult to all the victims of the conflict in Syria if the statue stays outside the Human Rights Council, and if Russia does not get called out for backing the Syrian troops. Now next, the ICRC are training individuals in more than just first aid. Recovering the bodies of people killed in conflict and handling them with respect is essential in Ukraine as in every other country. Forensic personnel play a vital role, and the ICRC is supporting forensic work in Ukraine. When people die during an armed conflict, their bodies must be managed respectfully. They must be found, recovered, documented, identified, and properly buried. So why is forensic work important? Well, the bodies of people who die during a conflict are not always handled with dignity and respect, and yet the dead are so important for families and communities. Hazards such as mines or shelling mean that bodies are sometimes left unburied on the battlefield. When they are collected, it is important to identify them, or at least try to bury them in a dignified manner, and in such a way that they can be identified later. This is where forensic expertise is valuable. Handling dead bodies during a conflict is difficult. It usually means adjusting procedures, and there will be a need for coordination between forensics personnel, investigators, and the armed forces. And we have seen in other countries how deficiencies in forensics can lead to remains being unidentified or identified but incorrect, and to families losing trust in the identification process. Now, in the case of Ukraine, many bodies have still not been found. This means that people still do not know what has happened to a family member. Forensics is also an essential part of finding out what has happened to missing persons, and people have a right to know what has happened to their family. Now, the teams that retrieve the bodies often work in the midst of fighting and under stressful conditions. Forensic staff deal with the most traumatic consequences of a conflict and also operate under difficult conditions. Their work should be acknowledged, and they should have the resources they need. So again, the ICRC is doing some great work, more specifically in Ukraine, to help honor the dead and give the dead a proper burial and respect they need after their passing. Now, to end the show, we find ourselves unfortunately back in Thailand with Protection International. 2 land activists were summoned by Chum Phey police after posting about the visits to their home by military officials prior to the constitutional referendum in August. Now, it turned out that the 2nd Infantry Division, the 8th Infantry Regiment by 1st Lieutenant Witthisen, had alleged that Mr. Sarayuth, alleged offender number 1, and Mr. Shadet, alleged offender number 2, had committed a libel offense in bringing into a computer system false or forged information, partly or as a whole. They were asked to report themselves to the Deputy Superintendent of the Chum Phey Police Station on the 25th of October at 1300 hours at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The charges could have stemmed from their posting the information about the incidents in which at least 8 officials led by the military had come to meet the villagers on the 4th and 5th of August prior to the August 7th constitutional referendum in Bon Sam Phak Nam. Now, the news post was headlined, "Military Raided Home Asking to Meet Phu Phan Man Land Activists." Now, there has been an increase in prosecutions against human rights defenders based on libel and computer crime charges. From human rights perspective, it is a judicial harassment aiming to incur more burden on the human rights defenders as they have to seek help from lawyers to defend themselves. It has also created fear among the human rights defenders and villagers affected by land issues. Previously, authorities had been cooperating well with the local community to manage the land right issue regarding the land in the Phu Pha Man National Park under the collaboration known as Cham Pa Project. Now, the recently launched forest reclamation policy has reignited a land dispute in Bon Sam Phak Nam. Now, the latest legal action against the 2 land activists will not help to solve land issues among the distant villagers, but it will unnecessarily make the conflict more complicated and create more burden for persons involved in the justice process, including the police, public prosecutor, and the court. So again, we see Thailand violating a human right. Unfortunately, just some land activists who were speaking up with their opinion about a land issue. Unfortunately, find themselves reporting to the police station. So we'll keep paying attention to Thailand, and hopefully they can get some laws in place to get up to date with these international laws, these humanitarian laws. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to check out any of these stories in their entirety, you can find their links to the articles below in the description. While you do that, why don't you subscribe to our YouTube channel, or give us a like on Facebook, or you can follow us on Twitter, or you can do all three. But thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. That does it for your top human rights organization review, and I was your host, Bryce Dolan.